Saturday, November 3rd, 2018, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This morning I want to talk about how more and more countries, especially powers like China and Russia, are continuing to try to move away from using the dollar as a currency for transactions between themselves and other countries when they don't need to. And earlier this year, I made a video in March, and it was entitled "What March 26, 2018 Will Mean to the Petrodollar." It's when the International Energy Exchange in Shanghai, China, started trading the Wane contract, oil contract. So it's the first oil contract traded in a currency other than the dollar. And if you want to really know what I think about how this process will evolve, I recommend you watch that video. You need to also look at history, I think, to know about what will happen to the dollar. It's not going to collapse overnight. You just have to look at sterling or the British pound, which used to be the global reserve currency before the dollar. Of course, it's lost a lot of its value versus the dollar in the last 100 years. It's gone from almost $5 to under 130 right now. But it's still an important currency, and it does move up and down short term. And even it's even held by some other countries as a reserve. Of course, not as much as the dollar. So I saw an interesting story this morning on Zero Hedge, and it says Moscow initiates de-dollarization, India to pay for S-400 systems in rubles. So I want to look at that story a little closer. I also want to look at the gold and silver futures market. Of course, I recommend people buy physical gold, but unfortunately for now, the paper market still controls the price of gold. The CFTC, how they keep track of who's doing what in the futures market. I'll look into that and talk about how that could impact the price of gold and silver. Before I go further about the dollar and then the COT report, or Commitment of Trader report, I'd like to thank all the subscribers, be they long-standing subscribers or new subscribers, for their interest in the channel. I'd like to thank all the people who've contributed to the channel as well, all the Patreons, all the donations, all the purchases of merchandise in the Monaco 64 store. I appreciate it, and hopefully I'll be able to keep this channel going and as interesting as possible. That's my goal. And of course, the mission is to wake people up to the fraudulent nature of our monetary system and to an alternative view of what I think the economy should be like. You know, the more free market, less government. So those are the the missions or goals of my channel, educating the public about it. So let's look at this story on Zero Hedge. It says Moscow initiates de-dollarization, India to pay for S-400 systems in rubles. So one thing I like to say before that is Russia and China are the major countries that are doing, going very much head on and very aggressively trying to move away from the dollar. As I said earlier, the Chinese have started a oil contract traded in yuan back in March. Now this story about Russia, that they're going to be paid by the Indians in rubles. But why haven't people done that in the past? Well, some smaller countries have tried in the past, and we all know what happens to them, thanks to some of the work by John Perkins, he wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I've got the Secret History of the American Empire book here. But basically what John Perkins, he was ex-CIA, of course. What he explains is that if smaller regional countries, smaller powers like Latin America, Iraq, or Libya, if they try to move away from the dollar, try to deal in different currencies amongst each other, they are very much in danger, those countries. And what do they do? What do the Americans do? Well, first they try to negotiate with them, say, can you please, you shouldn't do that. And if they say no, to hell with it. We want to, like Gaddafi, he wanted to start a old dinar for sub-Saharan Africa. And look what happened to him. Look at Saddam Hussein. He wanted to sell his oil in euros, and look what happened to him. And but with Russia and China, it's different because they're major nuclear powers, and it's very difficult for the Americans to do anything about it, short of a global war, a big war, which worryingly seems to be something that these major powers are focusing on. I mean, a lot you probably seen in the news a lot. The NATO exercises, the South China Sea, all the saber rattling. That is not. It's a bit unsettling, and it's a bit disappointing because we thought that Trump was going to respect other countries. He wanted to do away with NATO, but we seem to be going completely the other way. He's gone full neocon. He's even got John Bolton as his advisor. So it's not surprising that Moscow and Beijing are trying even harder to get away from the dollar and protect themselves even more. It's a shame. But anyway, what about this story? It says here, since it became evident last summer that India was moving forward with the purchase of at least 5 of Russia's S-400's air defense systems, the controversial initiative, which is part of India's big ambitions for regional dominance, immediately ruffled relations with Washington, resulting in the complete cancellation of at least one planned visit of Mike Pompeo and Jim Mattis to New Delhi. The other thing I would say, why can't we, the world, be competitive? Why do the Americans need to always, why does the dollar need to dominate, everything? I think it's a good thing to have. It would be even more beneficial to Americans in general if the dollar didn't need to be so important. It's the old Triffin paradox. To have just one reserve currency, that reserve currency needs to run a huge current account deficit, so that countries can have some of that currency. So, and this is why America's got such a huge trade deficit, current account deficit. It would even help America wean off that system. But the deep state and these people don't seem to care. They just want to be in power. So it goes on to say, but this week another huge bombshell dropped after a $5.4 billion deal for India to acquire the S-400 systems from Russia was clinched during Putin's 2-day visit to the country in early October. That's quite a big deal, 5.4 billion. I know it's not that big for central banks. They create billions and hundreds of billions out of thin air, but it's significant. The contract will be settled in rubles as part of Moscow's broader policy and pursuit of de-dollarization of the Russian economy. And we know that early this year, Russia sold almost all of its U.S. treasuries. So they continue. And I'll read a little further here. It says, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov announced on Wednesday The contract has been signed in rubles, according to TASS. The idea of de-dollarizing the Russian economy has been actively discussed in the country lately due to the tightening of U.S. sanctions. Russian President Vladimir Putin supports weaning the country's financial sector off the U.S. dollar. VTB Bank head Andrei Kostin told RIA Novosti. He added the move doesn't mean the complete phasing out of the American currency. So he's being a little bit diplomatic. You can't move away completely, of course, from the dollar, but you can try to do as much as possible. I think what it will mean more for Americans is that it will mean more. You have to earn your way in the world. America might have to sell more things abroad, export more, and maybe that's one of the reasons why we're having all these trade talks. Maybe to make it easier for America to export more. But in the end of the day, the only way to export more is to have very good products, to have a stable currency, and that's the only way you're going to do it. So now, back to the gold and silver market. Commitment of traders reports. Well, these reports come out Friday, late on Friday. I think it's just before the stock market closes, and they give you a snapshot of where this commitment of traders was Tuesday, the previous Tuesday, or so Tuesday the let's see, 30th of October. So the commercials are usually the big bullion banks, and whatever they do, a lot of times matter a lot for the market. They seem to control the market, and historically for the last 15-20 years they've rarely been net long gold or silver. About 3 weeks ago they'd actually gone net long gold and silver, but in the previous two COT reports we saw that they'd actually gone short, and that they'd increased their shorts substantially, especially 2 weeks ago. I think there was an increase of almost 50,000 in the gold shorts in the commercials. So I'm keeping a little bit track of this. And what does it mean though if they're going to go long, and they're usually never long? Well, it means that there's a good chance that the price of gold and silver could move higher. And who are the non-commercials? Well, they're the small speculators or the hedge funds, those kinds of people. And a lot of people rightfully argue that the commercials play around with the non-commercials. It's the wash and rinse. So now they're going long, and they're close. They're still short now because they've turned around a little bit in the last few weeks. But I'll tell you what they've done here. So as of Tuesday, compared to the previous week, the short interest for the commercials increased by 2,300, while the long interest increased by 5,819. So there was a 3,502 net long increase, which is encouraging for those who believe, in the precious metals, buy physical metals, and want to see, this artificial price take off, really. So right now, the commercials are long 82,398 contracts in silver, and they're short 92,158. So about 10,000 net short. So, but it's decreased, that short exposure. What about gold? Well, gold, about 2 weeks ago, there's a big increase in the shorts. Last week, a smaller one, but this week it's quite interesting. We've got the short interest actually decreased by 12,872, so almost 13,000, and the long interest increased by 2,443. So net long 15,000 increase, as of Tuesday this week. So that's encouraging as well. Right now, though, the commercials are long 197,000 and short 165. So it's nowhere near, to being to them being long again, but it's moving that way. Will be interesting to see next Friday what they've done. But I would suspect that they probably closed a lot more of the short positions maybe and went long. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. You can also follow me on Steemit, DTube, and on Twitter. I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye.